Hey class, welcome to our first European history video for EUH 2000. Today we're going to be talking about two particularly important topics, the origins of hierarchy within early civilization and monotheism. There was a fundamental split during the Neolithic age in the way that our ancestors organized themselves. Many of our ancestors settled down and became farmers, while others took to the saddle and became raiders and nomads. Our nomadic ancestors lived shorter and more brutal lives. They formed societies around survival and martial prowess. Powerful patriarchs often took multiple wives, and tribes rarely had kings, but rather elder councils ruled by the individual chiefs of extended clans and families. These people were not savages. They were often brilliant inventors, and some of our first ancestors to master metalwork, as they created fishhooks, saddle fasteners, and weapons from bronze. They were also enterprising as they traveled between various communities, bartering for the goods needed to survive in their difficult lifestyle. These peoples rarely managed a population much larger than 10 to 12,000 at a time. Strength was originated from bloodlines and action. Families earned the right to rule other clans, and the strongest, smartest, and most charismatic among the clan would rule. However, there was rarely strict hierarchy. Brothers ruled in pairs, cousins shared responsibility of governance. There was little use for a figurehead on the back of a horse, so it was common practice for families to share power among one another. In contrast, as humans began to settle into cities, this created a fundamental shift in how society was organized for a few reasons. The earliest human farming communities were often more vulnerable to raiders and famine. They existed at the will of their neighbors and the elements, but by banding together, these early settlements achieved a couple of major advantages. They were able to help defend one another from raiders, and they were able to produce more surplus to survive during times of famine and drought. As these groups organized, cities began to develop, which offered a safe haven from the elements. Early cities benefited from their large populations and were able to invent some key technologies such as walls, field plows. They tamed beasts of burden like oxen and created the mill and eventually the wheel to ease their daily labors. In Sumerian context, we know they started developing writing, and eventually we found that they would create shrines to individual chief deities for each city. These religious beliefs became the fabric of how cities interacted with each other. Often, the gods of their faiths became rigid, adherence to strict codes and guidelines of behavior and loyalty to their home. Their gods themselves adopted the characteristics of the city, which held them in such high esteem. But how did these organizations become the kingdoms and empires we will be examining throughout this course? It's actually a pretty straightforward concept. By formalizing the distribution of crop production to taxes, the ruling class, often made up of warriors who defended the people, were able to maintain order through threats of violence or retribution against citizens who threatened that order. The priests maintained knowledge and legitimized the kings and nobility who ruled, um, and claimed that the kings possessed God's knowledge and approval. The king would then in turn legitimize his warriors through exaltation of their ancestors and granted them influence and wealth. This created a society which was rocky at times, but gave the common man safety from outside threats so long as he obeyed the laws of man and God. He is relatively safe within the confines of his king's domain. However, do not fall into the intellectual trap of thinking this was basically the same system as we have now. Kings were judge, jury, and executioner on all matters. They created laws based on their own whims and beliefs and the pragmatic needs of the day. There was nothing protecting the common people, and the average person was seen as replaceable. Toil and work were the demands of these early gods, and their leaders reaped the benefits. These early cities provided safety and more stable lives, but in exchange for their own personal voice in governance.